Omari Newton, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Omari, I'd like to have you start out by telling me just a little bit about this whole overture with the arts thing that you're involved with your sister as well.
Yeah. So my twin sister, Akila Newton, started this organization, Overture with the Arts, with a goal to bring performing arts training to underprivileged youth. And it's sort of expand. At first, it started off underprivileged youth in the Montreal area, and it's expanded, and now we do stuff all across Canada. But it's her organization, and this is the third year in a row that I've been performing for her Black History Month events. But it's the seventh year in a row that Overture with the Arts has been bringing Black history education through the arts to schools in Montreal.
Overture with the arts is not specifically a black thing, though, right?
No, it's not.
It's arts, right?
It's the arts, yeah. In fact, they have presentations that go on for Holocaust Remembrance Week. They have stuff going on for Black History Month. It's just this particular performance is for Black History Month because it's February.
How did you get involved with this and the Black history aspect of it?
Well, I've always been an artist, and I've been a professional artist since I was 17. And for me, art and activism and social justice have always been intertwined. My heroes are people like Chuck D, the group Public Enemy. I was very influenced by Rage Against the Machine. So I've always had this interest. And because my twin sister's organization has been doing similar work, it was just sort of like this natural progression that we started working together. Because she's really good at the strategic elements of like booking shows and logistics, and I can perform and write. So
like your agent in a way.
She's like my agent in a way. Although I won't tell her that.
She'll ask for a cut.
Yeah, she'll want. Yeah.
What about this particular show this year, Slam Obsidian? What is that about?
Slam Obsidian is a presentation that combines elements of slam poetry, and the way I do slam poetry, it's almost like a cappella hip-hop verses. There's some video elements to it. It's very interactive with the audiences where I'll ask questions, and there's even there's a couple poems actually that I have students take part in to help me tell those stories. And this year we decided we wanted the emphasis to be on prominent figures in Black Canadian history. And actually this started because I got called out by students a couple years ago, and I was talking about kind of the usual suspects, your Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and they're like, well, what about some
Rosa Parks?
Rosa Parks, of course. And they asked, what about some Canadians? And I was like, you know what, you're right. There's some amazing people here.
Did you know about the Canadians in any detail before you started this?
You know what, I'm not even going to lie. Not nearly as much as I do now or as much as I should have. I was guilty of the same thing that a lot of students are, in that so much of our media comes from the U.S., and I just sort of passively, consume these stories about amazing people, but I didn't know nearly as much about Canadian people as I should.
So tell me a little bit about who you're featuring then in Slam Obsidian and why you chose those people.
Sure, yeah. Well, one person that we talk about is Viola Desmond. And of course, for those listening who may not know who she is, she's had quite a bit of acclaim recently in Canada, but Viola Desmond staged a staged a protest similar to that of Rosa Parks before Rosa Parks even did.
About 10 years before, actually.
About 10 years before, and that's something that I didn't know, right? So she sat in a movie theater in New Glasgow, Nova Scotia. It turned out the movie theater was segregated. She refused to give up her seat, and it ended up, although she ended up losing her case, she inspired another woman named Carrie Best, who we also talk about. Now, interesting note, Carrie Best, 5 years before Viola Desmond actually took the same stand in the same theater in New Glasgow with her son, right? Now, Carrie Best was so inspired by the discrimination she faced in that theater, she started the Clarion, which is one of Halifax's first Black newspapers. So she started in the Clarion, and one of her first major stories, she reported on this incident that happened to Viola Desmond. And I try to impart this on the students I talk to, that acts of resistance and social justice don't exist in a vacuum. So you might take a stand, and you might not personally see the benefits of taking this stand, but collectively, if we all work towards changing things, eventually change does happen.
Now, you use slam poetry. Just explain, perhaps, for those who aren't aware of that, exactly what that involves and how that works.
Sure. So to me, slam poetry is poetry that is meant to be performed live. So it's poetry with, when you're writing it, the intent is that it'll be performed rather than just read by people. So to me, it's a hybrid of theater, of poetry, because some of the standard tropes of metaphor and simile and all that stuff exist still, but it's almost like a monologue you're giving with the intention of doing it for a live audience.
And there's a real beat to it as well.
The way I do it, yeah. I was a hip hop artist and an MC before I was an actor. Some people who might, have been around Montreal in the late '90s. I was part of a collective called Kobayashi. It was an acid jazz group, and I was the MC in that group. So I started off rapping, and then got into poetry through my love of hip hop music. And now, really, my slam poetry is just like a cappella hip hop.
Well, Omari Newton, I have to ask you to give us a little taste of that.
I can give you a taste. So this is a signature piece of mine that I perform around Black History Month, and it's called Doodoo Brown. It goes like this. When I was a young lad playing in the sandbox, a boy said, "N-word, your skin is doodoo brown." So I got mad pissed and cocked my fist to deliver a crushing pound, when suddenly, from above me, I heard this frightening sound. It was my mother on the balcony saying, "Boy, put your fist down." Sheepishly, I agreed, unballed my fist, and lowered my head. My mom said, "Boy, come home right now or I'll make your backside red." Embarrassed and scared, I said a prayer and hoped no one was looking. Bit my lip, let a final threat slip, and headed for my whooping. Now my dad said, "Boy, you can't punch white people right out in the open. When the police come, you'll be the one they cuff. That ain't no joke. And explain to mom and dad what that boy said to make you vex. And when you explain things to West Indian parents, a beating is always next." I said, "Mommy, he called me the N-word, said my skin was doodoo brown, acting like this was no place for me and I should leave this town." My mother touched my little head. My father said, "Son, listen, you can't use violence every time someone is dissed." And then my folks, they spoke in unison, and this is what they said. They said, "Your skin is brown, like Ella's sound, like Jordan's round ball head, like mango trees and fallen leaves and freshly baked sweetbread. Foundation beams, the earth that breathes, and dried coconuts in the west. Brown is the color of Muhammad Ali's chest, Maya Angelou's text, and Mother Africa's breast. That boy is just confused. You have to set him right." Then my parents held me in their arm till I fell asleep that night. So the very next day, I went out to play, and there was that same boy smiling. He figured I caught a beating and was ready to keep on wilding. So this same racist young man, destined for the Klan, said, "N-word, your skin is doodoo brown." So I looked at him and just shook my head and smacked that smile into a frown. Now, my mom and dad were right that night, but you must remember this: though my palms are white, when I fight, brown is the color of my fist.
All right. Beautiful. Omari Newton.
Thank you.
Omari, since you've been doing this with your sister, performing for these things, what has Black History Month come to mean for you?
Black History Month, to me, really is just, it's history, right? We call it Black History because we're emphasizing specifically the contributions of African Canadians, but to me it's such a pivotal part of North American history, and to me it symbolizes a sense of pride in my culture and people who came before me, and it symbolizes hope for the next generation coming up, because I feel like they're already much more evolved than even my generation. I was at an audience today. I was talking at the study, and I looked out in the audience. And
the study is a school.
The study is a school in Westmount, right? And I looked out in the audience, and I saw it was a very diverse audience. I saw people who looked like they were, quote unquote black and quote unquote white and quote unquote Arab, all sitting next to each other, learning together, and it was really, really inspiring, because I remember I was the only black kid in my grade, basically. My sisters and I were the only black people in our school, and I feel like just having the chance to go back and speak to this younger generation about the past so they don't repeat the same mistakes going forward.
Omari Newton, thank you so much for coming in.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.